So it was on this phone that I was sitting in my house typing this wonderful email to a top-level administrator in my organization. Dear Gus, thanks for your email. I really appreciate your interest. This is a gentleman that has the voice of top leadership, someone that can make the difference for my team. I'm sitting there using this device that happens to be the forum of all of our important conversations these days. 4 paragraphs deep, CCing 6 other people. I'm relying on the autocorrect to handle my business, and I hit send. And seconds later, I start thinking, wait, maybe I should revisit this email. It was a big email. And I look at the first sentence, and it says, Dear Gustav. Dear Gustav. I instantly, in my haste, in my perception of being efficient, I complicated a conversation that had no need to be complicated. The words that I use in my communication on a daily basis did not portray on the phone that I was using to write this thoughtful email. Dear Gustav, what was I thinking? Why didn't I go back and check? And part of the problem is we're living in this environment, this fast-paced environment that takes us minute by minute, second by second, and just brings us along, and we're not building in these pauses. Pauses that truly can make a difference in the way we communicate with people. Pauses that are necessary for us to not only hear what somebody is saying, but actually feel and build partnership with them. This fast-paced environment that we're always on play, phone in hand, phone on hip, phone right in front of us, regardless of what family member is sitting in front of us, what meeting we're sitting at, what TED Talk we're watching. It drives us away from understanding, wait a second, there is a pause button out there. We can reflect in action at any given point of time. And when we talk about healthcare, which I'm sure everyone here has had some face time with healthcare, we realize very quickly that this world of efficiency that we're trying to develop and live by doesn't allow us to pause when we need to. About 3 years ago, I was walking into a doctor's office, getting into this really well-appointed doctor's office. Cherry wood bookcases, cherry wood, nice long table. And I'm sitting next to somebody, which put me in a state of vulnerability. I was sitting next to my mom. My mom, who at that point was a nurse for 35 plus years, knew every medical disease, disorder, symptom that you can think of by the book. We're sitting there, and this very well-dressed, well-appointed physician walks in, nice, ironed, white coat, sits down, and begins a discussion with us. So the physician, she was a breast surgeon. My mom had very recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. And as I sat there, as her youngest son, regardless if I was wearing a suit, wearing a hospital ID, I was sitting there as her youngest son, listening and observing this surgeon speak to my mom, I realized I was witnessing something that was very unique. I watched this surgeon talk to my mom in a very different way. She took her time. She spoke about what breast cancer is, the different diagnoses, the different stages. She talked about what treatment options were available. Better yet, she pulled out a book or a booklet, turned it around, went page by page with me and my mom, crossing out things that were irrelevant to my mom's care. And I sat there and I watched this. Obviously, I was nervous. Obviously, I was vulnerable. I was still my mom's youngest son in that seat. I watched this and I realized it was unique, but I didn't truly understand how unique it was. Until moments later, we're downstairs in the parking lot. My mom puts her seatbelt on, looks over to me in the driver's seat. Now remember, my mom, a nurse for 35 plus years, looks at me and says, what did she say? And that's when I realized, at that moment, how magical that clinical interaction was. How unique that clinical interaction was, because that surgeon made the time to pause. That surgeon just proved to me that not only did she understand everything about breast cancer, but she understood what my mom was thinking, what my mom was not thinking, and what my mom was feeling. And it's really important to think of empathy differently. Currently, we think of empathy as a trait. And I want to dispute that today. Empathy is a skill. And we need to shift our mindset to look at it that way, because it is a skill that we can teach, that we can learn, that we can practice, and potentially even master. But the issue with the word empathy, it's a big word. It's a word that confuses many of us, especially if we're in the mindset that it is a trait. Either you're born with it or you're not. How many of you guys have been to a diner before? If you're from New York or Jersey, you've all been to a diner. What happens? You sit down and you sit in front of this 45-page diner menu. Indian food, Greek food, Italian food, Japanese food. The menu itself paralyzes us, just like the word empathy. When we're posed or when we're forced to look at a menu that is so large, what do? We go back to our knee-jerk reactions that take us to that place of comfort. We go back to that grilled cheese and tomato soup. We go back to that Caesar salad with grilled chicken dressing on the side. In a heartbeat. Because that's where our comfort zone is. And when we talk about the word empathy, it may appear like this to many. But it shouldn't. Because there is a way forward. There's a way that every one of us can empower not only ourselves, but each other to start practicing the beauty of that pause, to build in that empathy. Now look, in healthcare, we're very familiar with deconstructing and diagnosing. So let's look at the DNA of empathy for a moment, because there's micro skills that we can start practicing today. There's a wonderful book out there, The Patient Interview by Cole and his colleagues, that describe empathy as reflection, legitimation, and exploration. Even these three words can be very complicated. So let's test this out. You know, Doc, I know I have to stop doing cocaine. However, it makes me really productive. I'm not falling asleep at work in my meetings, and I get my stuff done so quickly I can go home and spend time with my family. Knee-jerk reaction response in healthcare. Mr. Smith, you got to stop using cocaine, or you're going to end up in the hospital or dead. But what if we looked at it a different way and reframed that? Hey, Mr. Smith, thanks for sharing that. It seems like it could be frustrating. Reflection. You know, I have a lot of patients and friends that deal with issues like this where something is working for them, but however, they don't really like what they're doing. Legitimation. You know, you mentioned the word being more productive. Tell me more about that. Exploration. It took less than 10 seconds to build in this touch point to actually empathize with a patient, to acknowledge what that patient is struggling with, which may not actually be the cocaine, but it's the decision or the understanding of how to get away from there. And you know, again, we understand diseases, and diseases even put us in a paralytic state. 1 in 4 people that started using alcohol, drugs, and tobacco currently have a substance use issue if they started the use before the age of 18, leaving 40 million of us dealing with the substance use issue in this country, 1 in 7, statistically speaking. Now, these numbers are very daunting and, again, extremely paralyzing for us. Because if you think about medical education the way it stands, we're primed to talk about 3 different disease processes until we turn blue, but those numbers, the prevalence is shadowed individually by the number of folks dealing with substance use. So how do we look at this diner menu, if you will, this complicated figure in front of us? What do? Our knee-jerk reaction is, can't do anything about it. I don't know where to start. But there is a way forward. And the way forward is, let's not just worry about the disease. Let's not just worry about the algorithms in our head about how we're going to fix somebody. Let's actually worry about the person sitting in front of us. Let's worry about the fact, are we building partnership with that person by building in a pause in this fast-paced environment that we're so effective? How many of you guys take your cars to get an oil change? You pull up to the corner Jiffy Lube or Quick Lube, and what do they use? They use a checklist. They use a checklist to keep themselves on task. They use a checklist to understand what to do that they're trained to do. It's all about efficiency. And unfortunately, if you look at medicine, we're kind of following the same pattern. There are very thoughtful checklists out there that serve a purpose, but is it about time we start navigating away a little bit? Even taking a moment, the 10 seconds, to actually empathize with somebody? Because we know as we empathize, we acknowledge, and if we do have that partnership and we are consistently acknowledging our patients, we may have better outcomes. We may have better treatment. We may have better adherence. But if we continue this journey on checklists, we're just staying pretty efficient, maybe not so effective. We are in an industry that is seeking that next innovation. Technology, apps, websites, treatments, this medication, that medication. All fine and good, all serve a very important purpose. But if we're truly going to shift the way we practice medicine, we need to use a compass that's based on humanism. We need to look at what we're currently doing, take a step back, and pause, and build in those moments for empathy. Let's look at acknowledgement and empathy as that next innovation, that groundbreaking innovation. And it makes it sound like so common sense, but it truly isn't. Ask your peers sitting right next to you right now. How many of them have ever been trained in the micro skills of empathy? It sounds like common sense, but really, spoiler alert, it's an innovation. That diner menu, let's go back to it. Let's think about the diner menu where it paralyzes us and we go back to our comfort zone. Empathy, acknowledgement, does not have to do that to us. Because starting today, you can start practicing empathy with your peers, with your colleagues, with your patients. Good luck, even with your families. You can build in moments to reflect, legitimize, and explore. You could have conversations right when you walk out of this room and actually feel what the person's saying to you, as opposed to just listening. Allow them to understand that you heard them, as opposed to just, checking out that text message while they're talking to you. Folks, today is actually a moment for all of us to stand up and act as agents of change, taking this information back to our teams, building in that support structure as the leaders that you are for them to build the pauses into their repertoire. So the interesting thing is, I'm a victim as well of this efficient world we live in. The majority of my emails in the past few weeks have started off with this. And yes, on my phone. They've started off with this. I apologize for any inconvenience the delay in my response has caused. The interesting thing is, when I type out the word inconvenience, it unfortunately comes out as incontinence. So, I apologize for any incontinence my delay in responding has caused you. I'm a victim of following this autocorrect that we've built into our lives, that we rely on so heavily. But standing in front of you, I'm willing to even make a change. I want to make a change. I want to get away from that and pause. And with that said, look, I truly hope I did not inconvenience any of you today, and I definitely hope I'm not leaving any of you with incontinence. Thank you.